Tutankhamun's funerary temple, his tomb, and the sarcophagus found in it. A funerary temple for Tutankhamun at Medinet Habu. Part 2. The architectural elements and segments of wall relief composed of reused blocks were themselves reused again, as fill inside the 2nd and 9th pylons, built by King Hormab after he succeeded A. Finally, during medieval times, both pylons, and the 10th pylon as well, served as quarries for local building projects and also for construction at other sites in the environs of Lua. Some Egyptologists thought that these blocks bearing the names and figures of Tutankhamun and A derived from two different buildings, since two different names are mentioned in the inscriptions they bear. Resolution of this issue in favor of a single structure, called Mansion of Neb-Kera, beloved of Amun, founder of Thebes, sometimes shortened to Mansion of Neb-Kera in Thebes, entails the supposition that it was begun while Tutankhamun still reigned at a time when A's role was that of a loyal courtier, but completed by A when he himself acceded to the kingship after Tutankhamun's death. This idea is consonant with the techniques of the reliefs. Those depicting A in the service of King Tutankhamun are carved in raised relief. Down through the 18th dynasty, Egyptian sculptors employed this technique for spaces with limited sources of light, above all, for the innermost rooms of a temple where the select few practiced the cult. Such rooms were built and decorated fire-asked, taking precedence over more generally accessible parts of a temple. Those raised reliefs showing A as pharaoh, like the scenes of warfare and hunting, featuring King Tutankhamun, will have decorated the walls under the roofed ambulatory surrounding the courtyard in the plan of the mansion proposed by Mark. There can be no doubt that King A did in fact complete the mansion of Neb-Kera, beloved of Amun, founder of Thebes, fulfilling the time-honored obligation of a new ruler to his predecessor and, perhaps not coincidentally, affirming his legitimacy as successor. But did Tutankhamun intend this building at its inception to function eventually as his funerary temple? Nowadays, suppose rather that Tutankhamun commissioned it as a chapel in connection with the worship of Amun, possibly at Karnak, or as a way station, for example, along the processional avenue leading south to the Mut precinct or to Lua temple, with depictions of A in the reliefs as his loyal retainer. With an initial phase of construction, associate a plan to furnish the mansion with the series of statues depicting members of the Theban Ennead. Mark has found the names of 7 of these gods in the labels identifying figures in the reliefs on the piers of the ambulatory. When the structure along with the sculptures to furnish it was left unfinished at Tutankhamun's death, it could have then been converted at I's behest into a funerary temple for his predecessor. In that connection, the figures of A as a courtier in the reliefs would hardly have been appropriate. In other words, it is possible that A himself ordered such raised relief images of himself to be carefully erased and plastered over after he became king. The way I's figures were treated in the scenes, showing him as fan-bearer in attendance on Tutankhamun, is in marked contrast to the hacking out of the images of King A and Tutankhamun too, along with the names of both kings, which is doubtless attributable to Hormab's command. The question of the structure's original location remains, if it was intended as a funerary temple from its inception. Did it stand on the west bank of the Nile, in the series of funerary temples sited along the edge of the cultivation by earlier rulers of Dynasty XV? Or, consider more likely, on the east bank in immediate proximity to Karnak Temple? Martina Ullman reviews the pros and cons of both sites in her discussion of the mansion, deciding in favor of the likelihood that it stood near Karnak, where the blocks were found. Those who prefer the West Bank must reckon with ferrying blocks from Akhenaten's structures at Karnak across the Nile for reuse in building the mansion there, and then only a decade or so later, their return to the east side and Karnak, where they were re-employed once more, in the construction of Hormab's pylons 2 and X. The transport of blocks from western Thebes to Karnak for reuse is documented, but with certainty only beginning in Dynasty XX. Transport of blocks to and fro as would be required for a West Bank location of the mansion of Neb-Kera in Thebes is possible.